Highest 16th of October 2022. It was a very wet day. It's about 6 degrees. It's getting cold. It's getting wintry here in Ireland. And I think this rain is nearly all over Europe mostly. And this should end the water shortages that are happening in mainland Europe. It's 47Y, the crisis, international relations. And we're just going to look at the relationship between Russia, Europe, Germany, Europe, which includes Germany and France, and the USA. Now, we look at Russia and the USA. Before the war, well, they had a little bit of interdependency on technology, on fuel, on food, on nitrogen, fertilizers, on metals, and space science, because they shared the International Space Station, and Russia was bringing the astronauts up and down and all that. But they were uneasy on the military terms. They were sort of budding enemies. Okay. But both Russia and the United States could get on without any interaction with each other. They could live without each other. Now, Europe, which includes France and Germany and the USA, right, there was a good deal of trade, small amount of trade going on, not entirely interdependent on trade, but there was a good lot of it with cars and all that sort of stuff. But you never see much United States products in Europe. I rarely see them, even in this country. It's not electronics or anything. It's mostly firearms, funny enough. Guns that you see made in America here. You rarely see an ammunition. You rarely see much else. I don't never see America written on anything here. And there's a bit of interaction with education. There's cultural unity. They're very alike. There is foreign investment by the Americans in Europe, and particularly in Ireland, but in mainland Europe there's some, but they don't need much help. There is a bit, but Europe is able to do its own thing industrially and scientifically, and making all types of very highly technical stuff. Now, there's military security is a very, very big thing between America and Europe, because not only does Europe depend on America for its military security, but America depends on Europe because, for example, if Hitler had won the war, who would America partner with for security? There'd be a picture of Adolf Hitler in the European Parliament, and it wouldn't be very easy for them to get along. Now, so for the USA, the benefit they get out of Europe is, I suppose, security. There is markets. They do have markets there. There's space, there's science, and there's cultural. But generally, they are commercial competitors. This is very important. America and Europe are commercial competitors. They're like two drapery shops on the one street. They're competing against one another. Now, if we look at Europe, which includes Germany and France and Russia, well, they're heavily interdependent for fuels, rail, raw materials, but they're military foes. They're military foes. They're on the brink of a shooting war at the moment. So what that means is that Russia benefited an awful lot from getting European money for its products, including its gas, but also for metals and all that sort of stuff, raw materials. So it benefited a lot, and Europe definitely benefited because the likes of Germany there is manufacturing using Russian gas to beat the band. It's flying with that. It was going well. It had a great relationship with it. Of course, it was burning this stuff. They were saying they were going to stop. They were never going to stop. That was all lies, and all their windmills and all is not working. But the point is, there was that's a symbiotic relationship. It's like the crocodile opening his mouth, and the bird goes in and picks the meat stuck in his teeth, and the bird gets the meat, and the crocodile gets the relief of having his teeth cleaned. That's a symbiotic relationship. It's not parasitic, like as worms would enter a creature and live off the creature. It's not that way. They're mutually benefit. So there was a very, very big mutual interdependence between Russia and Europe. But of course, there was always the uneasy military situation. They couldn't trust the Russians. Even though America, Russia and Europe are Judeo-Christian countries, doesn't seem to matter much. Better relationships between between Christian countries and other religions than there are between these Christian countries. So I've drawn a little triangle here to kind of just give you the idea of what I'm trying to get across. I don't know, is there anything new in this? So we see the EU and Russia. It's a big military no-no. They don't want any military, and they don't want to see Russian troops coming into Europe. On the other hand, they're interdependent economically. They will go poor, both parties, if they don't resume trade, which is unlikely. If we look at Russia and the US, there was a little bit of economic interdependence. They were helpful, could be helpful to each other in trade, but they were military deadly foes, spending more than anything they could ever get from trading with each other on preparing for war with each other. And then you had the EU and the US, military interdependent, no doubt about that, both ways. People mightn't understand that, but it's benefiting the United States to have a partner to work with for security. But the US and the EU are competitors. They're serious competitors for wealth. And the EU is not as greedy. The Americans are a pure capitalist society, and they have all the big corporations. And they're mad looking to expand and take over everywhere. And this is a problem. Now, companies like McDonald's, they were involved in Russia, and Starbucks and all these, to the tune of 340 billion, and they're pulling out now. That's 340 billion gone off their wealth, and Russia's trying to replace them with their own. But it's not great, but that's what's happening there. So you see that economic interdependence dying out. So you have a situation where there's nearly going to be no trade with America, Europe and Russia. Russia's going to be isolated like that, but then Russia is going to deny its goods to Europe. You can see the point of view. If you won't buy our oil and won't pay us for it and won't give us the money for it, well, we're not giving it to you. You've all this going on. So what it really boils down to is that before the Ukraine war, industry was leaving Germany at a big pace, because Germany has another issue that's not as serious in the US, and that is Germany, France and the EU is mad green. They really, really do believe that they can run their economies on solar energy and wind energy. And that is madness. It is absolute madness. And the prices of electricity are gone so high before the invasion that companies were already leaving, and now since the invasion, companies are shutting down. A lot of the car manufacturers are shutting down. They're reliant on Russia for at least 40 to 45% of its fuel, and I believe a bit more. So they're now shutting down. Now remember, with the storage of gas and all this in the EU, what they have stored is only enough for domestic requirements and a bit of electricity generation. It's not enough for industry. If industry goes flat out this winter, the gas will be gone by New Year's Day. So they cannot run their industry at full output, and they're trying to get other sources. Of course, it's not as easy because it's very hard to pipe it in, and it's 4 to 5 times more expensive anyway. Meanwhile, the United States has all this fracked gas. They have oil, they have coal, they have no shortage of fuel, even with the Democratic Party and Joe Biden trying to throttle it with green ideas. The fact is, they have full and plenty. Electricity is about a third the price in most states in America that it is in Europe. Now, I agree, gasoline is nearly as dear as it is in Ireland or Britain, but that's gasoline alone. Their ordinary gas, their ordinary electricity and their coal has not increased to that extent. And so it's a return to some type of more industry in the United States and the demise of the same industry in Europe. So this means that there are three parties. If you just look again here, you have the EU, Europe, Russia and the United States, and the EU and Russia are facing poverty. They're facing poverty. Russia can deal with it better because they'll have fuel, they'll have food, they'll have nitrogen, they'll have raw materials. They'll be able to survive it better with the fuel because they'll be warm at least, and they'll have transport. But Europe has neither raw materials nor fuel. And instead of protecting their sources and planning for the sources of fuel, they thought that the wind would blow and the sun would shine on a night like tonight, when it's cold, wet, and relatively calm here in Ireland or everywhere else. And that's not how it works. So it's looking bad for Russia. It's looking bad for the EU. But in my humble opinion, Russia will weather it better. And the winner in all this is the United States. The United States put Europe up to all this green stuff. It put them up to the Paris Climate Accord and all of this. And it's not doing it itself. And it put them up to all this. It put them up to not to certify the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. It tried to stop them getting Russian fuel before this happened at all. And when the invasion of Ukraine took place, that must have been a great cheer and a great sense of relief in the United States, in the planners there, that they now had driven the wedge between the EU and Russia. They're laughing all the way to the bank. They were hoping to pick out the assets of the Ukraine for very little money. That didn't work, and it's a dismal prospect. It is one of the most dismal and depressing videos I've ever made. I mean, I cannot see any type of economic prosperity going forward for the EU and Germany and France, particularly, or for Russia. I see misery in both places. The only thing, the Russians are a bit more used to it. And now we have the mess in the United Kingdom, in Britain, and that's another day's work. You'd think they'd be separate from all this, but no, that's not how it's working out. So folks, that's a depressing scene. That's what happens when the managers of the EU do not plan and run their affairs right. There's a foreign minister, I just can't think of his name at the minute. The man, he's a common fella. He said the other day that Europe was a garden and the rest of the world was a jungle. In other words, that Europe was a civilized garden and the rest was a savage jungle. And he's a man anyway, I just can't think of it. But that's what he said. I mean, this is what they are. They think they're some kind of fancies. And when they're cold and hungry and no mobile phones and no electric blankets, I'll tell you, it might put a different tune on their bow. Anyway, folks, that's the best I can say. You know what I'm getting at there? I'm saying that the conflict between the relationship between Europe and Russia, that the fact that they're military enemies, but they're interdependent for materials and goods and all that sort of stuff, and they're near neighbours. I mean, you couldn't make up. You'd nearly say the devil was busy. You couldn't make up such a direct conflict to see the European deciding forevermore to cut relationships, economic relationships with Russia. You couldn't think that would happen. Maybe the good that will come out of it, maybe that it will eventually have to snap into reality. But it's a dismal outlook, I have to say. So anyway, I hope everybody gets through it all right. That's all I can say. I met a man the other day, an 84-year-old man. He says it mightn't be just as bad as we think. And I think that the fact that we're getting our fuel from Norway may be a help. It may be somewhat of a help. We're not just as dependent on Russia as they are in the rest of mainland Europe. Folks, not a joyful story, but please give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down, and I kept it fairly short. We'll see you back for something else soon.